In the unfolding narrative of our cosmic neighborhood, a moment arrives that will define not just the present, but will echo into the annals of astronomy forever. It begins with the quiet yet thunderous announcement of an interstellar object, designated 3IATLAS, entering our solar system. This is no ordinary comet, no common fragment of frozen gas and rock, tracing the predictable arcs of our sun's dominion. Instead, it is a messenger from the unimaginable vastness beyond, carrying within it secrets from another star system, another history, another epoch of cosmic evolution. The arrival of 3I Atlas marks the third confirmed interstellar object humanity has had the privilege to observe, following in the legendary footsteps of Oumuamua and Comet 2I Borisov. Yet, unlike its predecessors, this one carries with it a timing so uncanny, so perfectly aligned with humanity's watchful instruments and turbulent skies, that it immediately raises the question: coincidence or something deeper? The astronomical community first detected it not as a faint whisper, but as a sharp anomaly, a trajectory that no solar system body could claim, an orbit that bore the fingerprints of an origin far beyond our sun's influence. It became clear here was an interstellar traveler, a true alien among comets. The object was first catalogued by the Atlas Survey, its discovery rooted in patient sky monitoring meant to protect Earth from hazardous near-Earth asteroids. Instead, this survey gifted us a window into the interstellar gulf, catching the ghostly arc of 3I Atlas as it fell inward toward the inner solar system. Almost instantly, astronomers across the globe turned their telescopes toward this messenger, eager to measure, dissect, and understand. Spectra, photometry, orbital analysis, all began to flow in torrents. And with each data point, the mystery grew deeper. Its path was hyperbolic, the unmistakable signature of an interstellar origin. No gravitational tug from Jupiter, no distant nudge from Neptune could account for such an orbit. The sun had not birthed this traveler. It came from the dark between stars. But from where? Astronomers began tracing backward, simulating stellar motions, seeking a possible home star system. Possibilities emerged, a young star cluster here, a moving group there, but certainty remained elusive. For now, 3IATLAS carries its origin as a secret embedded in its icy, dusty body. Yet its arrival is not just scientific, it is symbolic. It is as though the cosmos itself has placed before us a puzzle, a test, at precisely the moment when our instruments, our spacecraft, and our minds are prepared to interpret it. The year of its arrival is dense with celestial events, solar storms, comets of local origin, novae flaring in distant constellations. And amidst these, here comes a traveler from beyond. Is it simply chance? The rational scientist says yes. The universe is vast. Probability dictates such occurrences. But the poet, the philosopher, the seeker in all of us cannot help but ask whether this convergence points to something greater. From the very first images, 3I ATLAS defied expectations. Its coma grew brighter, then dimmed, then flared again, suggesting a nucleus alive with activity, volatile and unpredictable. Unlike 2I Borisov, which behaved much like a classical solar system comet, 3I seemed to carry within it a temperament shaped by foreign suns, alien radiation, and cosmic journeys no human can yet imagine. Even the dust it shed hinted at differences, color ratios that refused to neatly fit into known comet categories. Was this an icy relic of a young system? A fragment expelled by planetary migration far away? Or perhaps a shard from a disrupted exoplanet wandering for eons before stumbling into our solar system? The discovery electrified both professionals and amateurs. Observatories scheduled emergency time, adjusting long-planned programs to capture every photon of light reflected from this traveler. Amateur astronomers, too, pointed their backyard telescopes, their CCDs capturing data that would be uploaded and shared worldwide. Citizen science merged seamlessly with professional astronomy, a testament to the democratization of cosmic discovery in our age. Together, humanity stood watch, and so, the story of 3IATLAS begins not as a distant curiosity, but as a central character in the unfolding drama of 2024 and 2025. It is not alone as it streaks inward. The sun itself enters an active phase of its cycle. Solar storms grow fiercer. Auroras dance across high latitudes with colors unseen in decades. Seismographs record the rumblings of Earth. The skies fill with coincidences that seem almost scripted. And in the heart of it all, this comet-like visitor from another star arcs through space, as if carrying on its fragile dust tail the unanswered question, what does it want with Mars? For, as its path was calculated, astronomers realized that it would not simply pass through the inner solar system unnoticed. Instead, its trajectory carried it dangerously, tantalizingly close to Mars. By October 3rd, it would perform a flyby of the red planet at a distance close, enough for spacecraft in Martian orbit to attempt direct observations. Here lay the unprecedented. For the first time in human history, an interstellar object would be studied not just from Earth, but from another world. The ExoMars orbiter, the venerable Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Even rovers on the Martian surface could, in theory, participate in this historic watch. It is here that the first heading's script must end on the precipice of an encounter, a convergence of time. An interstellar traveler threading its way through a solar system alive with storms, lights, and questions. Humanity watches, instruments primed, wonder ignited. And so begins the greatest chapter yet in our dialogue with the cosmos. While 3I Atlas streaked across the solar system, the skies themselves seemed to conspire in wonder and dread. Astronomers were already buzzing with excitement about the interstellar visitor when, without warning, the universe delivered another shock. Not one, but two separate stars erupted in violent explosions within a time frame so uncanny it felt like fiction. These stellar detonations, light-years apart, arrived in our telescopes like cosmic thunderclaps echoing through the void. Their timing was so strange, so chillingly aligned with the interstellar visitor, that even the most skeptical scientists felt the pull of awe. The first explosion was detected as a sudden brightening in a nearby galaxy, the unmistakable signature of a supernova tearing a star apart in its final breath. These are among the most violent events the universe can produce. A star, having fused all its fuel, collapsing inward and then rebounding with such ferocity that it outshines billions of suns combined. But But just as instruments began to measure the expanding shockwave of this stellar death, a second alert came in. Another star, another detonation. Two cataclysmic events, separated by light years, but delivered to our watchful eyes in the same cosmic moment. To those who study the heavens, supernovae are rare jewels. They do not arrive on command. They do not synchronize like choreographed explosions in a cosmic ballet. And yet, here they were, overlapping in human observation. Their light racing across space to reach us now, in the very season that an interstellar object intruded upon our system. Was this mere coincidence, or did the cosmos weave connections we could not yet see? Telescopes scrambled to record every nuance. Spectral data poured in, showing the fingerprints of heavy elements forged in the stellar furnaces: oxygen, silicon, calcium, iron, the building blocks of worlds and life itself. Humanity was witnessing, in real time, the crucible of creation. Yet even as astronomers marveled, the timing gnawed at them. The light from those stars had traveled for millions of years, only to reach us now, precisely as other anomalies filled the sky. Why now? Why together? For the general public, news of two exploding stars sounded like something from a science fiction thriller. Headlines blared. Social media erupted. Some treated it as apocalyptic prophecy, others as celestial poetry. Videos circulated showing animations of stars tearing themselves apart, shock waves racing outward at a fraction of the speed of light, leaving behind either neutron stars or black holes. In every retelling, the emotional charge was the same, all laced with unease. Humanity's tiny world suddenly felt like the stage of something grander, a script unfolding beyond comprehension. Scientists reminded audiences that supernovae pose no immediate threat. The stars in question were far enough away that their radiation would not scorch Earth, but still, the symbolism lingered. These were cosmic alarms, reminders of the universe's immense scale and power. And when paired with the arrival of 3IATLAS, the narrative refused to quiet. Coincidence, the rational voice insisted. But in the human heart, connections were already drawn. The sky was trying to tell us something. Meanwhile, seismographs on Earth registered violent tremors, almost as if our own planet was resonating with the cosmic drama. Earthquakes in different regions left communities shaken, buildings cracked, lives unsettled. No scientific link tied the tremors to the supernova or the interstellar visitor, yet the simultaneity was impossible to ignore. People looked up at the night sky differently now, with wonder, yes, but also with the faint pulse of dread. In deeper analysis, astronomers began to connect these explosions to the life cycle of galaxies. Perhaps the light arriving now was the result of a chain of events set into motion before humans even walked upright. The deaths of those stars would seed their galaxies with elements that might one day form new planets, perhaps even life. In this way, the supernovae were not just deaths, but rebirths. Yet their arrival in our timeline, overlapping with 3IATLAS, made them feel less like distant history and more like urgent messages. Some speculative voices whispered theories. Was there a cosmic alignment? Was an interstellar civilization signaling through orchestrated stellar events? Could these explosions, in some unfathomable way, be tied to the journey of objects like 3IATLAS? Mainstream science dismissed such notions, but the questions spread like wildfire. Forums buzzed, podcasts speculated. The line between science and myth blurred as humans sought meaning in the synchrony of cosmic chaos. For those who held fast to reason, the double explosions were reminders of the immense unpredictability of the cosmos. The universe does not answer to human curiosity, it simply is. But for storytellers, philosophers, and even cautious scientists, the temptation to weave patterns was irresistible. The very act of coincidence itself became a kind of narrative, a tale of humanity, caught in the crossfire of vast cosmic processes. Thus, the twin star deaths became entwined in the greater saga of September 2025. They were no longer isolated events in distant galaxies. They became characters in a growing story, a story that included the rumbling Earth, the storming sun, and the alien traveler threading through our planetary family. Each piece fed into the next, like chapters of a book we had only just begun to read. By the end of that month, humanity had not just observed the universe, it had felt it. The stars had died, their light reaching us across impossible distances, and in their glow we saw both our insignificance and our belonging. The explosions did not harm us, but they shook us, emotionally, culturally, even spiritually. They became a mirror in which we saw our fragile world suspended against an infinite backdrop, and in that mirror, the question burned brighter. If stars could explode, if Earth could quake, and if interstellar visitors could arrive in the same breath of time, what did it mean? What was coming next? As the stars above erupted and interstellar messengers cut across the heavens, the earth beneath our feet seemed unwilling to stay silent. Seismographs lit up across continents, recording tremors that rattled cities and unsettled millions. It was as if the planet itself had joined the cosmic chorus, adding its own violent notes to a symphony already in motion. People in distant regions, who had never thought much about the universe, suddenly found themselves staring at cracked walls, swaying lamps, and trembling ground, and then lifting their gaze skyward in fearful wonder. Earthquakes are, in truth, the language of our planet. The shifting plates beneath us grind, collide, and slip, releasing pent-up energy in sudden jolts. This is the heartbeat of a living world, a reminder that our planet is not a static rock, but a dynamic engine of motion. Yet in September 2025, those jolts felt strangely symbolic. They seemed to answer the supernova above, to echo the arrival of 3 IATLAS. Coincidence, science insists. And yet, to those living through it, the timing was too precise to ignore. Reports came in rapidly. Across fault lines, long monitored by geologists, the ground convulsed. In one city, skyscrapers swayed visibly, glass trembling in window frames. In another, highways cracked, leaving jagged scars across asphalt. Social media flooded with shaky footage, chandeliers swinging, pets panicking, shelves spilling books and dishes. To those caught in the middle, it felt apocalyptic. How could the earth itself be moving at the very moment the skies seemed so alive with strange and violent events? Scientists moved quickly to calm the public. They explained that earthquakes are driven by tectonic stress, not cosmic alignments or stellar explosions. The timing, they reassured, was coincidental, unsettling, yes, but not connected. Yet the human heart resists such cold separation. When two stars explode, when a comet from another star system arrives, when the sun itself roars with storms, and then the earth quakes, the line between natural explanation and supernatural pattern blurs. Even those who knew the science could not help but feel the unease. Researchers did consider alternative hypotheses. Could solar storms, through changes in Earth's magnetic field, exert influence on tectonic stability? Could charged particles streaming into the ionosphere trigger stress release in vulnerable crustal regions? Papers existed, theories whispered in conferences, but no clear evidence. The magnitudes were too small, the mechanisms too weak, and yet the clustering of events in this single month gave those theories fresh oxygen. For the public, the lack of certainty was enough. If scientists could not fully rule it out, then maybe, just maybe, the sky and the ground were indeed talking to one another. On the streets, it did not matter what models said. 4 families huddled outside after buildings shook. 4 workers staring at fractured walls. 4 children wide-eyed from the tremors. The quakes were part of something larger. Every news anchor, every headline, every trending tag fused the events together. Supernova, comet, solar storms, quakes. To live through them was to feel woven into a story too big to explain away. The irony is that earthquakes, while terrifying, are routine. Hundreds occur around the globe every single day, most too small to notice. Larger ones strike regularly, reshaping landscapes and reminding us of our fragility. But timing is everything. And in September 2025, timing turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. Suddenly, what might have been seen as yet another tremor became part of a mythos, a restless earth beneath restless skies. For scientists, this presented both challenge and opportunity. They needed to dispel panic while also acknowledging the to study tectonics in isolation was no longer enough. The public demanded connections, demanded meaning. Could models of space weather incorporate seismic stress data? Could we someday find subtle links between solar cycles and tectonic rhythms? These questions, once fringe, now entered mainstream discussion. Not because evidence had changed, but because human perception had docked in the end. The Earth's quakes left behind cracked roads, damaged homes, and frightened communities. But they also left behind a deeper mark, the sense that we are not separate from the cosmos, but participants in its unfolding drama. The ground moves, the stars explode, interstellar visitors pass, and the sun flares, and somehow, in our hearts, it all feels part of the same story. The human mind craves narrative, craves connection. Perhaps that is why, even in the cold light of science, we return to the same haunting question: were the quakes of September mere geological inevitabilities? Or were they the Earth's way of echoing the celestial upheaval above? Whatever the answer, one truth remains. In that month, no one could escape the feeling that the universe was speaking all at once: sky and ground, light and stone, fire and quake. And humanity, caught in the middle, could only listen in the deep silence of the void. Something ancient and uninvited drifted across the boundary of our solar system. Astronomers first marked it as a faint, moving speck against the backdrop of stars, a visitor, and not one of our own. Its path was too fast, its angle too sharp, its trajectory unmistakable. This was no ordinary comet born of the same disk of dust and gas that had birthed Earth and her siblings. This was something older, something alien. 3I ATLAS, the third confirmed interstellar object ever detected by humankind. It was, in many ways, the culmination of years of expectation. Since Oumuamua in 2017 and I Borisov in 2019, scientists had known more were out there, fragments of distant systems wandering between the stars. But unlike those fleeting apparitions, 31 ATLAS arrived during a moment of cosmic drama, as nova exploded, as solar storms intensified, as the Earth itself trembled. The timing made it more than a scientific curiosity. To many, it felt like a messenger. The first measurements suggested a volatile-rich body, one that bore more resemblance to a comet than to the mysterious shard of rock that was Oumuamua. Its coma glowed faintly, its tail stretching as it succumbed to the heat of our sun. Yet this was no ordinary cometary out. These were ices forged under alien suns, molecules born in a nebula far removed from ours. Every puff of vapor, every trace of dust released into space carried the signature of another stellar nursery, perhaps billions of years old, perhaps long since extinguished. Scientists moved quickly to mobilize. Telescopes worldwide shifted focus, spectrometers calibrated, observation campaigns scheduled through the International Astronomical Union. Coordinated efforts stretched from Chile to Hawaii, from Europe to Australia. This was an unprecedented chance to see interstellar chemistry up close, to compare alien volatiles against our own, to ask whether the building blocks of life are universal or local. And yet, despite all the excitement, humility prevailed. 31 ATLAS was small. At millions of kilometers away, even the sharpest lenses saw it as a smudge, a point of light with faint structure. Hopes of detailed imagery gave way to the more subtle science of spectra, brightness, curves, and tail morphology. But for researchers, that was enough, because hidden in the faint glow of its coma were fingerprints of its origins, isotopic ratios, molecular bonds, spectral lines that could tell the story of another world. The drama was not just chemical. The sun itself seemed eager to test this visitor. Solar cycle 25 surged toward maximum, coronal mass ejections lashing outward with chaotic ferocity, and 3 IATLAS, drifting ever closer, became a natural laboratory. Its ion tail twisted and kinked in response to magnetic fields. Its brightness fluctuated, its morphology altered. To scientists, these were not just visual curiosities, but plasma diagnostics, the visible handwriting of invisible forces. Here was a foreign body, serving as a probe, revealing the shape and strength of solar wind conditions with every shift of its luminous veil. And then came the anticipation of October 3rd, 2025. On that date, 31 Atlas would sweep past Mars, not near enough to threaten, but close enough to be captured by the watchful eyes of orbiting spacecraft. The ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter and Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter adjusted their schedules, their instruments primed. For the first time in history, human technology around another planet would observe an interstellar object at close range, pixel by pixel, spectrometer line by spectrometer line. Mars would give us a perspective Earth never could, the possibility electrified the scientific community. From Mars' orbit, resolution would improve dramatically, perhaps to 30 kilometers per pixel, too coarse to reveal fine detail, but sharp enough to distinguish whether the nucleus was compact or diffuse, whether the coma spread evenly or pulsed with jets of activity. More importantly, the dual vantage points of Mars and Earth created the potential for parallax, allowing astronomers to triangulate distance, size, and activity levels with precision that single-view observations could never match. But perhaps the most enticing aspect was chemical. The trace gas orbiters, spectrometers, designed to sniff out methane and other faint gases in the Martian atmosphere, could be turned toward the interstellar stranger. Could they detect cyanide, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide? If even a fraction of these molecules registered, humanity would, for the first time, hold direct evidence of the volatile chemistry of another stellar system. Each detected line would be a whisper from a sun we had never seen, from a nursery long dissolved into the interstellar medium. And so the world prepared. Professional astronomers worked overtime. Amateur astronomers, scattered across continents, prepared their telescopes. Together, they formed a network of constant vigilance. Every night, new images were uploaded, new magnitude estimates filed. Professionals brought depth and spectroscopy. Amateurs brought continuity, the night-after-night monitoring that filled gaps. Together, they formed a planetary scale. I turned toward a single alien traveler. As October drew closer, anticipation mingled with uncertainty. Some recalled the disappointment of comets that fizzled, their brightness predictions unmet. Others remembered the shock of disconnection events, such as Comet ENC's tail severed by a coronal mass ejection in 2007. What if 3I Atlas experienced the same, but with interstellar chemistry? Could reconnection dynamics differ, revealing new physics never seen in terrestrial labs? The questions piled higher than the answers, and yet that was the beauty of it. For scientists, 3I Atlas was more than a rock and ice fragment. It was a test case for planetary defense, a chance to validate detection and tracking techniques, to refine methods for characterizing hazardous objects. Today, it was harmless, a cosmic tourist. Tomorrow, another like it could pose a threat. To practice on 3I Atlas was to prepare for survival for the rest of humanity. However, the object held something beyond science. It was symbolism, a tangible connection to other stars. To look at it, even as a faint dot in a telescope, was to look at the debris of another world, another sun, another sky. It was to realize that we live not in isolation, but in a galaxy whose pieces drift and mingle, sometimes crossing paths with us. The visitor carried within it secrets of nucleosynthesis, of supernova enrichment, of chemical processes in stellar nurseries billions of years and billions of kilometers away. To study it was to study the galaxy itself in microcosm. To witness its passage was to experience the unity of cosmic time scales, the ancient frozen past hurtling into our present. And so, under that heading, 3I Atlas became more than an object. It became a mirror. It reflected our hunger for knowledge, our fear of insignificance, our longing for connection. It reminded us that even as we quake beneath shifting ground, even as stars die above us, Even as solar storms rage, the universe will always send us messengers, some small, some faint, but all carrying the same truth. We are not alone in this galaxy of wanderers. The story now plunges into even darker waters, where the name Borgia no longer represented just political ambition or ecclesiastical corruption, but the dangerous intermingling of blood, desire, and forbidden unions. The whispers that had long trailed Lucrezia's shadow began to solidify into narratives too scandalous to be ignored. And whether they were fact, exaggeration, or deliberate smear campaigns, they became central to the family's infamy. Enemies of the Borgias painted vivid portraits of Lucretia as a woman whose beauty was not only a weapon of seduction but a curse, entangling her in the sins of her own family. Whispers spread through Rome's palaces and taverns alike. Lucretia was accused of being both daughter and lover, sister and temptress. Her intimacy with her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare Borgia, was described in letters, poems, and venomous gossip, fueling an aura of moral decay at the very heart of Christendom. Whether or not these tales had roots in truth mattered little. The perception itself was enough to stain her image forever. Lucretia became a living paradox, an innocent pawn or a cunning player, depending on who told the tale. Some chroniclers presented her as a victim, forced into situations designed by men of ruthless ambition. Others depicted her as an active conspirator, fully aware of the dangerous games of lust and power she played. At the center of these rumors was the notion that the Borgia bloodline was tainted, not just politically, but physically, corrupted by acts that defied the laws of church and nature. Every glance exchanged between father and daughter, every act of tenderness between siblings, became magnified into evidence of incestuous bonds. And in the unforgiving atmosphere of Renaissance Rome, where power was gained and lost through whispers as much as through steel, these rumors carried devastating consequences. They made the Borgias appear not just ambitious, but monstrous, a family that blurred the line between human desire and diabolical corruption. But beyond scandal, these stories served a strategic purpose. By painting Lucretia as morally compromised, her enemies could diminish her political influence, portraying her as an unfit mother, wife, and ruler. Yet paradoxically, this infamy also enhanced her legend. To be feared and desired simultaneously made her presence impossible to ignore. Her very existence became a weapon, one she could wield in courts and negotiations as effectively as her brother wielded the sword. Thus, the forbidden desires attributed to the Borgia family were not just scandal. They became a tool of narrative warfare, used to undermine their authority while ensuring their immortality in history's darkest chapters. For Lucretia, it was a double-edged sword. The shame of slander bound her name to infamy. Yet the power it carried gave her a form of influence no rival could strip away. The truth may forever remain blurred. But in the Renaissance, an age obsessed with both sin and spectacle, perception was reality. And for Lucretia Borgia, that perception was one of a woman forever entangled in the forbidden desires of her bloodline, a legacy she could neither escape nor fully deny. The life of Lucretia Borgia was never her own. From the moment she was born into the infamous Borgia dynasty, she became a piece on the papal chessboard, a pawn sacrificed, moved, and positioned to secure the power of her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her ruthless brother, Cesare Borgia. Every marriage she entered, every alliance she was forced into, was carefully calculated not for her happiness, but for the expansion of the Borgia dominion across Italy. Her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza was a perfect example of this cold-blooded strategy. At first, it was a union meant to bind the Borgias with the influential Sforza family of Milan. Yet as soon as Cesare and Alexander saw the alliance as weak or unprofitable, Lucretia's marriage was discarded with brutal efficiency. Giovanni was accused of impotence and dishonor, a charge that publicly humiliated him and severed the marriage without hesitation. Lucretia, caught in the storm of male ambition, endured the shame and became free once again for her family's next move. But her second marriage would prove no less tragic. She was wed to Alfonso of Aragon, a man whose noble blood tied the Borgias to the kingdom of Naples. For a brief moment, Alfonso and Lucretia found genuine affection, perhaps even love. Yet such sentiment meant nothing to Cesare, who saw Alfonso as a political obstacle. In one of the darkest episodes of the Borgia saga, Alfonso was brutally attacked and later strangled under Cesar's orders, leaving Lucretia devastated and once again weaponized by grief. To Alfonso, d'Este of Ferrara finally gave her stability, but it too was born of strategy, not choice. By marrying into Ferrara, the Borgias gained respectability and political grounding. Here, Lucretia would rise beyond her role as pawn and begin shaping her own legacy. But the scars of her earlier sacrifices never faded. Through these marriages, Lucretia was reduced to a currency of power. Each contract, annulment, or tragic death around her spoke less of romance and more of calculation. She was both the victim and the symbol of Renaissance politics, where women of noble blood were stripped of autonomy and reshaped into tools of dynastic ambition. And yet, within these sacrifices, Lucretia learned the very games that sought to control her. She understood betrayal, the fragility of alliances, and the merciless way men pursued dominance. Forced to survive in this pit of ambition, she transformed her pain into knowledge, her sorrow into strategy. Lucretia's life as a pawn reveals not only the brutality of papal politics, but also the beginning of her metamorphosis. In sacrificing her autonomy, the Borgias unknowingly forged in her a resilience and intelligence that would one day allow her to rise above the role of pawn and begin to move like a queen across the dangerous board of Renaissance. Italy. No story of Lucretia Borgia can be told without confronting the dark cloud of rumors that followed her throughout history. For centuries, whispers of betrayal, incest, and poison trailed her name, transforming her from a daughter and wife into a living legend of scandal. But behind these whispers lies a complex web of truth, half-truths and deliberate inventions, designed to tarnish the Borgia legacy. Enemies of the Borgias, from rival noble houses to ambitious clerics within the Vatican, seized every opportunity to paint Lucretia as a femme fatale. They whispered that she was her father's lover, that she shared an unnatural bond with her brother Cesare, and that her golden hair and angelic beauty hid the heart of a poisoner. These tales were spread in courts and taverns alike, crafted not from evidence but from political necessity. For the Borgias' rise to power was so meteoric, so shocking, that only by vilifying them could their rivals attempt to bring them down. In truth, there is no proof that Lucretia wielded the infamous poison rings attributed to her, nor that she participated in the darker desires that fueled Renaissance gossip. What is certain, however, is that she lived within an atmosphere of deceit where betrayal was an everyday language, and rumors were weapons as sharp as daggers. Every smile, every gesture, every public act of hers was scrutinized and twisted into evidence of corruption. The tragedy for Lucretia was that she could never escape these shadows, even when she acted with innocence. Her annulled first marriage gave rise to tales of her impurity. The murder of her second husband was blamed on her complicity, though she wept for him. Her beauty itself became a curse, for it made the rumors believable. And as the Borgia enemies spread pamphlets and chronicles of her supposed wickedness, the image of Lucretia as the Borgia siren became embedded in cultural memory. But if betrayal surrounded her, it also taught her how to navigate treachery. Lucretia learned the cost of misplaced trust, the danger of whispered lies, and the reality that in Renaissance Italy, reputation could be more lethal than any blade. Instead of collapsing beneath the scandal, she carried it like a shroud, turning her silence into power. For while others spoke of her, she listened, and in listening, she learned. Thus, the whispers that were meant to destroy her became part of her mystique. Whether true or false, they granted her a power that few women of her time possessed, the power of fear, fascination, and legend. February 1502 marked one of the most extraordinary and humiliating episodes in Lucretia Borgia's life. An event both documented and whispered about with hushed fascination across Italy. On this night, 3 public consummations of her marriage were arranged, not in the privacy of bridal chambers, but in the presence of witnesses, nobles, courtiers, and clerics alike. What should have been an intimate act of union became a calculated spectacle designed to prove the legitimacy of the Borgias' alliances and silence rumors of impotence or fraud. Lucretia, draped in ceremonial garments and stripped of dignity, became the centerpiece of this orchestrated ritual. Each act of consummation was treated less as a bond of love and more as evidence, recorded and observed like testimony in a court of law. For the Borgias, this was politics laid bare, the female body reduced to a battlefield where honor and power were either secured or destroyed. The humiliation was not simply personal but symbolic. In a world where appearances meant survival, the Borgias needed their enemies to see proof of vitality, virility, and strength. By forcing Lucretia into this public trial of flesh, they wielded her not as a daughter or bride, but as a weapon of validation. And though the night ended with her shamed, it also marked a turning point in how she understood her own role in the ruthless theater of power. For beneath the humiliation, there was revelation. Lucretia realized that her life would never belong to her. It was a performance on the grand stage of Renaissance politics. Every whisper about her chastity, every rumor about her desires, every public gaze fixed upon her became part of the script she was forced to play. Yet, within that painful awareness, she began to cultivate resilience. She learned to mask her sorrow, to bend without breaking, to transform disgrace into an opportunity for survival. This night, while remembered for its cruelty, became the crucible of Lucretia's metamorphosis. What should have shattered her spirit instead revealed her capacity to endure. In enduring, she began to gather the quiet strength that would one day allow her to navigate the treacherous courts of Italy with cunning and grace. Thus, the night of humiliation was not merely a degradation, it was also the origin of her power. For only through such profound exposure to cruelty could Lucretia begin to understand how to wield her own image, her silence, and eventually her authority. What appeared to the world as Lucretia's utter downfall would, in time, become the foundation of her strength. The humiliations she endured annulled marriages, public trials of her body, whispers of scandal should have left her broken, but instead they shaped in her a resilience that few in Renaissance Italy could match. Out of disgrace, she began forging the very tools that would later define her authority. In the shadow of her father and brother, she learned that survival depended not on innocence but on perception. If others insisted on painting her as a seductress, she let the image linger, using their fascination as a cloak. If she was whispered to be poisonous, she allowed the rumor to become a shield. For who would openly challenge a woman they feared? What was once intended to degrade her now granted her a kind of unspoken influence. Her move to Ferrara, after her marriage to Alfonso d'Este, marked a turning point. At first unwelcome, she was treated with suspicion by the court, who saw only the notorious Borgia daughter. Yet, rather than collapse under disdain, Lucretia carefully rebuilt her reputation. She immersed herself in patronage of the arts, showing refinement and taste that elevated her status among intellectuals and nobles. She offered charity, easing the suffering of the poor and earning respect beyond palace walls. Slowly, the scandalous image attached to her name began to fade, replaced by one of elegance, diplomacy, and unexpected strength. It was in this transformation that Lucretia revealed her greatest talent, the ability to turn disgrace into legitimacy. Where once she had been mocked as a pawn, she now began moving like a queen on the chessboard of Italian politics. Her silence spoke louder than the rumors. Her composure unsettled those who waited for her to falter. And in her ability to transform personal pain into political capital, she became not only a survivor, but also a strategist. The lesson of Lucretia's journey is clear. Disgrace is never the end, but often the beginning of power. She did not erase her past, she carried it, reshaped it, and used it. The very stories meant to destroy her became the legends that surrounded her. And in navigating them, she carved out a place for herself in history, not as a victim, but as a woman who learned to wield the weight of her own reputation. Her disgrace became her weapon, and her power was born from the ashes of shame in the fragile stillness before dawn on September 23, 2025. The skies over the southern hemisphere revealed a drama that few could have anticipated. What had been an ordinary night of quiet observation became a night remembered in the annals of astronomy. On that morning, John Seach, an experienced amateur astronomer with a reputation for careful skywatching from his observatory at Chatsworth Island in New South Wales, detected something unusual. His telescope had swept across countless stars before, recording the endless constellations with calm detachment. But this time he caught sight of a glimmer that should not have been there. A faint speck, subtle yet distinct, brightened into magnitude 5.8, just barely within the reach of the unaided eye under pristine skies. This was V1935 Centauri, a nova, the sudden flare of a star that had lain dormant for centuries, now erupting with a violent release of pent-up energy. At first glance, it was unassuming, a faint light in the sprawling southern constellations. But that light was not just a star twinkling gently across the cosmos. It was the echo of an explosion vast enough to defy human comprehension. Billions of photons had begun their journey across interstellar space long before human beings had built cities, written histories, or looked up to wonder at the heavens. And now, arriving at Earth in 2025, they whispered of an event that had shattered the quiet surface of a white dwarf star. This was no mere fluctuation of brightness, it was a detonation, a stellar eruption announcing itself across the galaxy. Almost immediately, the discovery rippled outward. Within hours, astronomers around the world pointed their instruments toward NASA's Fermi Gamma Ray Space Telescope reported bursts of high-energy radiation, invisible to human eyes but impossible to ignore. Swift, designed to capture fleeting cosmic events, pivoted with precision and recorded the harsh signatures of X-ray emissions. The universe was not offering gentle spectacle, but violence, the kind of violence that twists magnetic fields into spirals, that accelerates matter to near-light speeds, that heats gases to tens of millions of degrees. What might have appeared to the naked eye as a faint new dot was, in truth, the unmasking of extreme physics. And yet, the cosmos was not finished. In a staggering twist, only days later, another nova erupted in the neighboring constellation of Sagittarius. V7994 Sagittari, blazing at magnitude 6.2, captured the attention of the very same observer, John Seach. The odds were extraordinary. Two distinct stellar explosions, both bright enough for backyard telescopes, both erupting within a week of each other, both detected by the same human gaze searching patiently across the sky. Novae are not impossibly rare. Astronomers record roughly 10 to 15 in the Milky Way each year, but most are faint, buried in the background, detectable only with advanced instrumentation. To have to emerge in such proximity, both capable of brushing the threshold of naked eye visibility, was the kind of coincidence that shakes even seasoned scientists. The professional community reacted with astonishment, scrambling to study the twin events. For many, the last comparable moment was in 2023. But even then, the symmetry and timing of this new pair felt uncanny, as though the universe had chosen deliberately to stage a double performance. The heart of a nova lies in a hidden drama of stellar cannibalism. A white dwarf, the dense remnant of a star once like our Sun, compressed into a sphere scarcely the size of Earth, orbits a living companion. The two stars form an uneasy bond. The white dwarf, with gravity so intense that a spoonful of its matter would outweigh mountains, pulls hydrogen from its neighbor, stripping gas from the larger star's outer layers. Slowly, patiently, over centuries or even millennia, the gas accumulates on the dwarf's surface. Pressure rises. Heat builds. The stolen hydrogen, trapped under unimaginable conditions, moves toward a tipping point, and then, without warning, the threshold is breached. A runaway thermonuclear detonation ignites, releasing energy equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs. The system brightens tens of thousands of times, turning a once invisible star into a spectacle visible across light years. The white dwarf, though scarred, survives, stripped of its surface fuel, but destined to repeat the cycle again. For scientists, novae like V1935 Centauri and V7994 Sagittarius are not just rare fireworks in the sky. They are laboratories. In the gamma-ray and X-ray bursts, researchers see the fingerprints of processes that echo throughout the universe. Shock waves accelerate particles to speeds that mimic those in supernova and even quasars. Magnetic fields knot and snap, shaping energy flows beyond human engineering. Observing these flares provides glimpses into conditions impossible to reproduce on Earth, offering windows into the extremes of matter and energy that underpin the cosmos itself. Yet, while laboratories bristled with instruments, ordinary people felt the awe differently. For stargazers in Australia, South America, and across the southern hemisphere, these novae became fleeting jewels in the night sky. The same constellations that had seemed serene and permanent now revealed themselves as volatile, alive, and unpredictable. To watch these stars brighten and fade was to feel the fragility of permanence, to know that the heavens, far from fixed, are capable of sudden and violent transformation. For countless skywatchers, it was a reminder that the universe is both cruel and magnificent, capable of destruction, but also of beauty so striking it silences words. The process of discovery itself became part of the story. Sitch's early detection, reported through the International Astronomical Union's Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, set in motion a global cascade. Telescopes from Europe to South America swung toward the southern skies. Observatories large and small contributed data, light curves tracing the rise and fall of brightness, spectra revealing the chemical signatures of the exploding gases, radio dishes capturing the whispers of expanding shells. Organizations like the American Association of Variable Star Observers, composed largely of dedicated amateurs, added crucial daily observations. Together, this network demonstrated that modern astronomy is no longer the sole realm of vast institutions. Instead, it is a dialogue between the lone observer with a backyard telescope and the vast machinery of international science. Even the designations carried weight. To the public, names like V1935 Centauri and V7994 Sagittarius seemed cold, cryptic, like bureaucratic codes. But for astronomers, each name carried meaning, marking these stars as part of a living archive of stellar change. They were not anonymous explosions, but entries in a long lineage of discovery. Each nova a page in the story of stellar evolution. The act of naming was itself a way of anchoring fleeting brilliance into the permanence of record. As September gave way to October, the light of both novae began to decline. Their peaks softened, slipping down curves that could stretch for months, sometimes even years. Yet fading does not mean finality. Some novae form dust in their expanding shells, dimming not because they are spent, but because their light is veiled. Others show strange oscillations, rising again in brightness as different physical processes unfold. To watch them was to watch not a moment, but a narrative, the gradual cooling, shifting, and transforming of a star's outer layers, each phase carrying its own mysteries And all the while, the coincidence remained haunting. Two explosions, so close in time, so visible, so spectacular, observed by the same watchful human eyes, offered not just data, but a sense of cosmic poetry. To some, it felt as if the universe itself had staged the performance deliberately, aligning these detonations with earthquakes shaking the earth below and solar storms rippling across the sun's surface. In the fragile balance of coincidence and meaning, humanity could not help but feel as though it had been granted a glimpse behind the curtain of the cosmos, a reminder of how small we are, and yet how privileged to witness the forces that shape galaxies. As the brilliance faded into memory, what remained was more than light curves and spectra. It was a collective human experience, the shared awe of looking up and seeing change written across the sky. For some, it was the reminder of mortality, of how even stars burn and falter. For others, it was an inspiration, proof that even in an age of technology and routine, the universe can still surprise us with beauty and violence in equal measure. Two stars had erupted, two lights had burned, and for a brief, unforgettable time, the sky had spoken with a voice that transcended centuries, telling us once again that the cosmos is alive with wonder, and that its stories unfold whether or not we are watching. In September of 2025, the universe seemed to conspire in ways that left both scientists and the public staring upward and downward at the same time, searching for meaning in tremors beneath their feet and explosions of light. It was a month when the earth shook and the heavens burned, and the convergence of these events set off waves of speculation, awe, and unease. The story began in South America, when, on September 21st, a magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck Venezuela, shaking buildings, scattering terrified residents into the streets, and serving as yet another reminder of the restless tectonic forces that shape the continent. Such quakes are not unusual for a region perched on complex fault systems, where the Caribbean and South American plates collide. But the timing would soon transform what might otherwise have been a tragic local event into a chapter of a much larger and stranger tale. Only 2 days later, amateur astronomer John Seach reported the first of two extraordinary novae, V1935 Centauri, flaring into naked-eye visibility from the constellation Centaurus. Within days, another eruption followed in Sagittarius, V7994 Sagittari, also bright enough to be seen through modest backyard telescopes. The universe, it seemed, had staged a twin spectacle in the sky at the very moment the ground below Venezuela quivered. Between September 21st and September 23rd, the human world found itself caught between earth and heaven, shaken by forces both terrestrial and cosmic. For many, the coincidence was too extraordinary to ignore. People have always been pattern-seeking creatures, hungry to find meaning in the unpredictable. Throughout history, natural disasters and celestial events have been bound together in myth. Ancient Chinese astronomers recorded comets and linked them to imperial collapses. Medieval Europeans feared eclipses as omens of plague or war. The Maya and Aztec priests tied the movements of Venus to cycles of sacrifice. Against this backdrop, the September convergence of earthquakes, solar storms, and stellar explosions felt less like random coincidence and more like the revival of an ancient script, the sky speaking to the earth in a language of light and fire. The media, with its appetite for the dramatic, fueled the fire. Headlines paired star explosions with earthquakes, giving the impression of causality. Social media posts blended amateur telescope images of the novae with shaky phone videos of Venezuelan buildings swaying, as though the two belonged to a single narrative. Conspiracy theorists wasted no time weaving tales of cosmic warning signs, suggesting that the novae heralded deeper planetary upheavals. Hashtags like *cosmic warning and *Earth and sky began trending, with users debating whether this was the universe offering a portent of global change. In this swirling atmosphere of speculation, voices of sober science were both present and struggling to be heard. Among scientists, the initial response was one of cautious dismissal. Novae occur thousands of light-years away. Their energy, though immense, disperses across vast interstellar distances. By the time their photons reach Earth, they are gentle enough to be captured by amateur cameras. Earthquakes, by contrast, are brutal expressions of pressure and friction building in the shallow crust of our planet. The mechanisms could not be more different. There was no plausible pathway by which a stellar eruption in Centaurus could rattle the ground in Venezuela. To most geophysicists, the link was not only tenuous but non-existent, and yet, even within academic circles, the coincidence sparked renewed discussions of fringe theories long relegated to the margins of geology and astrophysics. Some pointed out that the week of the Venezuelan quake and the nova discoveries also coincided with heightened solar activity. The sun had released streams of charged particles, which battered Earth's magnetic field and triggered disturbances in the ionosphere. Some studies, controversial and far from conclusive, have argued that such geomagnetic disturbances might influence seismic activity, perhaps nudging already stressed faults into rupture. The idea has never been proven, but the timing of the events rekindled debates that had lain dormant for years. Could solar storms act as subtle triggers, not causes but catalysts, tipping the balance in regions already on the brink of an earthquake? For the Venezuelan public, the quake itself was terrifying enough. But stories quickly circulated of strange lights in the sky before the tremors, flickers, and glows sometimes described in earthquake folklore as earthquake lights. Whether these were genuine seismic phenomena caused by stresses in the rocks, or auroral effects linked to geomagnetic disturbances, remained unclear. But when combined with the novae shining above, such accounts only deepened the sense of cosmic drama. It felt, to many who lived through it, that the earth and sky were locked in a conversation beyond human understanding. Scientists tried to balance dismissal with openness. Correlation is not causation, they repeated, reminding the public that dozens of earthquakes occur globally every week and novae are detected yearly. To find overlap in timing is not surprising when viewed through the cold lens of statistics. And yet, they acknowledged, human beings are not wired to live in statistics. We experience events in stories, and stories thrive on connections. For the public, the coincidence was irresistible precisely because it felt like part of a story written on a scale beyond human authorship. In the weeks that followed, two distinct narratives emerged. The first was soberly scientific. The Novi and the Venezuelan earthquake were unrelated, a collision of unrelated geophysical and astrophysical processes. Earthquakes come from tectonic strain, novae from stellar detonation. To link them was to confuse poetry with physics. The second narrative was symbolic. Perhaps the universe, in its vast indifference, occasionally arranges events in ways so striking that they appear meaningful, even if no causal link exists. The sheer improbability of two bright novae appearing in the sky the same week as a significant earthquake gave people permission to wonder, to ask whether the cosmos sometimes reveals patterns we cannot yet explain. This tension between science and symbolism is not new. It mirrors debates that stretch back to the Renaissance, when astronomers like Kepler studied the heavens with mathematical rigor, even as astrologers proclaimed celestial events as portents of earthly change. In September 2025, those ancient debates found new life, with modern instruments replacing astrolabes and satellites replacing parchment, but the core question remaining the same: do the heavens speak to the earth, or do they merely dazzle us with coincidence? In the end, perhaps the true significance of September 2025 lay not in proving or disproving cosmic causality, but in revealing how humans grapple with randomness. When events cluster, earthquakes, solar storms, novae, we search for connections, crafting meaning where none may exist. For some, this is a way of asserting control over the uncontrollable. For others, it is a recognition that even in a universe ruled by impersonal physics, moments of synchronicity can feel like whispers of design. What remains undeniable is the sense of awe. The earth shook. The sky exploded. For a brief moment, humanity was reminded that we live not on a stable, fixed world beneath a static dome of stars, but on a restless planet beneath a living, violent cosmos. Whether coincidence or connection, the juxtaposition of these events left a lasting impression that our place in the universe is not separate from its drama, but bound within it, part of a larger and more mysterious story still unfolding. October 3rd, 2025, stands as a date that scientists across the world have circled with anticipation, a day when the universe itself seems to lean closer to us and whisper secrets we were never meant to hear so easily. On this day, the interstellar visitor 3I ATLAS will pass Mars at a distance of around 28 million kilometers. To the average person, that number is incomprehensible, too vast to imagine. Yet, for astronomers, it is staggeringly intimate, a once-in-a-civilization chance to observe something born in another star system, traveling through our solar neighborhood, and caught in the lenses of machines orbiting a world not our own. Never before has humanity's reach extended in such a way. Robotic emissaries stationed around Mars, programmed to monitor that barren planet, suddenly repositioned to peer outward into the deep night and witness the approach of a wanderer from beyond the sun's dominion. There is a quiet poetry to this encounter. For centuries, Mars has been the object of our own longing gazes, the red light in the sky that inspired myth, war, and the dream of alien life. Now, in a reversal, Mars becomes the watcher, a platform for our instruments to stretch their gaze across millions of kilometers and record the passage of an interstellar traveler. The very idea that orbiters circling a distant planet can be refocused on a comet-like body from another solar system gives this moment a sense of destiny, as though the red planet itself was positioned not only as a world to be explored, but as a vantage point for broader cosmic revelations. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, with its famous high RIC camera that has mapped sand dunes, avalanches, and the delicate ripples of dust devils on the Martian surface, will now turn outward. Its eye, built to scrutinize landscapes with astonishing detail, will attempt to track a speck moving against the background of stars. The numbers may seem humbling, a mere 30 kilometers per pixel resolution, far from the breathtaking sharpness we are accustomed to seeing in its Martian photos. Yet even this faint resolution matters to distinguish whether 3I Atlas presents itself as a small nucleus shrouded in a fragile haze, or whether it blossoms into a luminous coma shedding interstellar ices into the solar wind, is to decide between two very different stories. A tight, compact nucleus might imply a traveler hardened by eons in interstellar space, a relic of some forgotten star system that now drifts in silence. A broad, glowing coma would mean activity, solar heat, awakening volatile molecules locked away since before our sun was born, molecules carrying the chemistry of another world entirely. Meanwhile, ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, designed to study faint whispers of methane and carbon dioxide in the Martian atmosphere, will be recalibrated to listen for something stranger. Its spectrometers, among the most sensitive ever launched beyond Earth, may capture the faint glow of molecular fingerprints as 3I Atlas passes. A detection of CN, CO, or even something more exotic would be revolutionary. For the first time, humanity would be sampling interstellar chemistry up close, using tools designed for planetary science, but now pointed toward the void. Each molecule would be a messenger, carrying with it the story of the star system where it formed. Was it forged in a cold nebula, far denser than the cradle of our sun? Did it freeze around its nucleus during the birth throes of an alien star billions of years ago? The answers are locked in the spectrum, waiting for a line of light to betray them. On Earth, astronomers will not be idle. Telescopes across continents are being coordinated, their schedules rewritten to align with the approach. From mountaintop observatories to small amateur setups, humanity will be casting a net of eyes across the sky. For once, the scattered points of light observed from Earth will not stand alone. Mars provides the second baseline, a parallax that allows true triangulation. With two vantage points separated by tens of millions of kilometers, the orbit, size, and activity of 3I Atlas can be measured with a precision that would otherwise be impossible. It is as though the universe has handed us two mirrors, aligned just long enough for us to glimpse a clear reflection of a passing ghost. The symbolic weight of this moment cannot be overstated. For generations, humans imagined Mars as a rival world, one that might host canals, civilizations, or threats. Now, instead of being studied for itself alone, Mars becomes our outpost, our ally in the act of cosmic witnessing. The orbiters circling it are not simply machines serving a single mission, but nodes in a web of human curiosity that stretches outward into interstellar space. This turning outward represents a shift, a quiet but profound acknowledgement that our exploration is no longer confined to our home planet, nor even to our closest neighbor. Mars is now a stepping stone, a platform from which we engage in galactic observation. There is an unspoken question lingering beneath the scientific excitement. What if 3I Atlas shows us something unexpected, something that breaks the patterns we know? Both of the previous interstellar visitors, Oumuamua and Borisov, were enigmatic in their own ways, one elongated and strangely not, the other more like a typical comet, but still bearing exotic properties. 31ATLAS arrives with no guarantees. Will it flare in brilliance as it approaches, releasing clouds of unfamiliar compounds? Will it remain muted, a dark shard of rock passing in silence? Or will it, as some speculate, display features so alien that our current classifications fail altogether? Scientists temper their excitement with caution, knowing that space often surprises us in quieter ways than expected. Yet even the possibility of faint signatures, an unusual ratio of carbon monoxide to water, a molecular fingerprint never before seen, or a coma with structures shaped by magnetic fields, is enough to justify the global coordination. The value of such data lies not in spectacle, but in precision. With each observation, with each light curve, with each spectrum, we move closer to understanding what materials circulate between stars, and by extension, what chemical seeds might drift through the galaxy awaiting new worlds to fertilize. Beyond the scientific journals and observatories, this story has seeped into the public imagination. Articles speak of Mars acting as a cosmic witness. Social media amplifies images of orbiters retasked to watch the skies. Memes circulate about a Martian camera photographing a messenger from another star. It feels less like dry astronomy and more like a myth unfolding in real time, a narrative where humanity's outposts align with celestial wanderers in an unscripted play of discovery. The poetry of it captures minds as much as the science. Mars, long regarded as a symbol of war and desolation, now participating in the reception of a guest from the stars. The implications stretch further. If interstellar objects pass through our solar system with more frequency than once believed, then this is not just a curiosity, but a rehearsal. Mars and Earth, acting together as observation platforms, may point the way toward future missions designed to intercept such travelers directly. The instruments of tomorrow might not only observe from afar, but fly alongside, sampling dust, imaging surfaces, and bringing fragments back for study. What begins on October 3rd as a remote sensing experiment could one day evolve into humanity's first hands-on encounter with materials forged around alien suns. For now, however, the focus remains on the silence of the encounter itself. There will be no fiery collision, no dazzling naked-eye comet. 31ATLAS will pass with quiet indifference, a dark traveler tracing its path across the solar system. Yet in that quietness lies its power. Mars, a world once thought to hold civilizations, will become the staging ground for us to glimpse into the interstellar void. Earth, watching in parallel, will join the dance. Together, the two worlds will bear witness to a story older than humanity itself, the movement of material across the stars, drifting endlessly until chance carries it near our fragile blue planet and our red companion. When the data arrives, it may not be spectacular in the way the public imagines. There will be graphs, spectral lines, faint images barely discernible against cosmic noise. Yet each line of data is a doorway. Each measurement adds to a puzzle that, when assembled, shows us not just what 3IATLAS is, but what the universe beyond our sun is made of. This is the significance of October 3rd. It is not a date for fireworks, but for revelation. Mars will not just be studied, it will help us study the galaxy itself. In its silent orbit, it will record the passing of a stranger, and through its instruments, it will remind us of something both humbling and exhilarating, that the universe is not closed, that the stars share their fragments, and that humanity, standing on the shoulders of planets and machines, is now ready to listen. Rodrigo Borgia's role in Lucretia's life cannot be captured in simple terms of affection or authority. He was her father, yes, but also her master, her protector, and her manipulator. His ambitions did not stop at Rome's golden palaces or the Vatican's throne. They stretched far beyond, into dynasties, alliances, and the very fabric of Italian politics. From the earliest days of Lucretia's childhood, Rodrigo's vision shaped her future. She was not raised as a child free to explore her own desires, but as a carefully groomed instrument of power, delicate yet sharpened, beautiful yet dangerous. Even her earliest lessons in poetry, theology, and courtly manners were never neutral. They were chosen to mold her into a figure who could charm and disarm, who could walk into courts of hostile nobles and emerge with allies instead of enemies. Rodrigo saw what others often overlooked, that in the turbulent, intrigue-filled world of Renaissance Italy, women could be far more than ornamental brides. They could be conduits of power, carriers of legitimacy, and wielders of influence in ways men could not. A woman's smile, her grace, her presence at court could open doors that armies alone could not breach. He raised Lucretia with this awareness in mind, and though his paternal love was real, it was filtered through this prism of ambition. To Rodrigo, Lucretia was both a beloved daughter and a keystone in the great architecture of the Borgia legacy. He trusted her with roles no son might perform with such subtlety. In her, he saw diplomacy personified. The cost of such a vision, however, was Lucretia's freedom. Every step of her life was orchestrated to serve the Borgia name. Her marriages were not sacred vows, but political treaties, signed in silks and jewels, but written in strategies and blood. The first union he arranged was with Giovanni Sforza, a connection meant to solidify ties with a powerful northern family. When the winds of politics shifted, and that alliance no longer served him, Rodrigo did not hesitate to annul it, casting Giovanni aside under the scandalous pretext of impotence. Lucretia's heart, her reputation, her very sense of self became casualties of her father's ruthless calculations. She was a player, forced into roles, sometimes innocent bride, sometimes discarded widow, sometimes whispered temptress, each identity crafted not by her, but for her, yet paradoxically, in binding her so tightly to his will. Rodrigo also gave Lucretia the tools to become more than a pawn. His favoritism placed her at the center of Rome's political theater. Few women of her time could boast of such direct influence over matters of state, even if that influence was often exercised in the shadows. when Rodrigo brought her to preside over papal courts in his absence. He was not simply indulging her, he was testing her, proving to allies and enemies alike that his daughter could embody the dignity of power. These moments, however constrained, planted in Lucretia the seeds of political intuition and resilience. But with power came danger. Rodrigo's blatant nepotism, elevating his children, showering them with titles, lands, and privileges, provoked resentment across Europe. To many, Lucretia was no innocent maiden. She was the living emblem of papal corruption, the daughter of a pope whose ambitions knew no holy bounds. Rumors became weapons. Her name was stained with stories of poison rings, forbidden liaisons, and incestuous whispers. These were not merely idle tales whispered in taverns. They were carefully planted narratives, designed by rival families to destroy both Rodrigo's reputation and Lucretia's usefulness as a political bride. Every time she entered a marriage hall or courtly chamber, she carried not only her own presence, but the heavy shadow of her father's scandals. And yet, Rodrigo's protection ensured she was never entirely crushed by these rumors. He stood behind her with the authority of the papacy itself, a shield few dared to challenge openly. Enemies might mock, but few acted. His power gave her space to survive scandals that would have annihilated another woman's prospects. In this strange balance, empowered by him, yet imprisoned by him, Lucretia found the paradox of her destiny. Her father gave her status, but not independence, a throne of influence, but no throne of choice. Still, within these constraints, Lucretia learned the art of adaptation. Rodrigo's dominance forced her to develop patience, resilience, and subtlety. While her brothers wielded swords and armies, she wielded perception, silence, and poise. Every slight, every forced marriage, every rumor became a lesson in the crucible of her father's ambitions. Lucretia was tempered into something more than he intended, a woman who would one day take the very tools he gave her and use them for her own survival. Their relationship remained layered, a tapestry of contradictions. Rodrigo loved her fiercely, sometimes indulgently, and perhaps even saw her as his favorite child. But his love was never free from calculation. He could raise her to dazzling heights one day and discard her happiness the next. To him, she was both daughter and destiny, inseparable from the grander scheme of his empire. And so, Lucretia's story cannot be told without him. His hand shaped her every move, but his shadow also gave her the chance to learn how to move in the dark in the end. Rodrigo Borgia's role in Lucretia's life was the most complex of paradoxes. He was the man who elevated her beyond what most women of her time could dream. And yet he was also the force that denied her true freedom. He empowered her while chaining her, adored her while exploiting her, and shielded her while exposing her to the world's scorn. It was this tension between love and ambition, between power and sacrifice, that molded Lucretia into the woman who would later redefine herself in Ferrara. Without Rodrigo's control, she might have lived a quieter life. With it, she was thrust into legend, forever bound to the contradictions of the Borgia name. The story of Lucretia's first marriage was never a tale of romance, nor one of tender beginnings between two young souls. It was a carefully crafted arrangement, born in the echoing chambers of power, where ambition mattered more than affection. and where family names carried greater weight than hearts ever could. Rodrigo Borgia, with his calculating mind and relentless pursuit of dominance, looked upon his daughter not as a child stepping into womanhood, but as an invaluable facilitator, vessel through which alliances could be secured, enemies pacified, and political footholds gained. In Orsini, a noble of respected Venetian lineage, Rodrigo saw not merely a groom, but an opportunity to extend the long fingers of Borgia influence into another house that carried its own prestige and history. For Lucretia, this union came at an age when she could hardly grasp the complexity of the forces swirling around her. She was adorned with silks and pearls, her golden hair braided into intricate patterns, her soft face veiled with layers of dignity and innocence. But behind every jewel and every ceremonial robe lay the unspoken truth. She was not marrying for herself. She was marrying because others had decided her path. When she walked down the aisle, greeted by the expectant gazes of Rome's nobility, she was not a bride in the truest sense, but a token, a living signature pressed onto a treaty that was written not on parchment, but in flesh and blood. The grandeur of the wedding masked the undercurrents of mistrust. The Orsini family, well established and proud, did not see the Borgias as equals. They saw in Rodrigo a foreign manipulator, a man whose rise within the church seemed both unnatural and threatening to the old Italian nobility. And now into their house came his daughter, young girl wrapped in finery, carrying with her not only the honor of the Borgia name, but also the suspicion and scorn that clung to it. To some within the Orsini halls, she was a gift laced with poison, an elegant trap that bound them tighter to a family they could neither fully trust nor entirely reject. Lucretia felt this tension almost immediately. The whispers that accompanied her presence, the sideways glances exchanged behind embroidered fans, the forced smiles at banquet-saul of it weighed on her delicate spirit. She was expected to be gracious, soft-spoken, and loyal, yet every word she spoke was measured, every gesture analyzed. Within the palaces and gardens of the Orsini, she moved carefully, learning the subtle art of diplomacy long before she could name it as such. She discovered that silence could be more powerful than protest, that a lowered gaze could disarm suspicion, and that a gentle smile could veil the sting of disdain. Her life in this marriage was never private. In the Italy of the Renaissance, a marriage between such families was not an intimate union, but a spectacle performed on the grand stage of politics. Banquets were filled with expectation, the seating of guests, the choice of attire, even the music played carried messages to allies and warnings to rivals. When Lucretia appeared beside her husband, she was not simply a wife, but a symbol of Borgia ambitiona, reminder that Rodrigo had managed to insert his bloodline into yet another venerable Roman household. Every gesture of hers became fodder for gossip. Her dress was said to reflect her father's wealth, her jewels his ambition, her smile his cunning. The gossip, however, did not stop at surface matters. Rome thrived on scandal, and the Borgias provided an endless feast for its hungry tongues. Whispered stories spread quickly, suggesting that Rodrigo had orchestrated the marriage not only to secure influence, but also to mask darker rumors that had begun swirling around his daughter. Was she truly innocent, or had she already been too deeply enmeshed in the murky games of her family? Did the Pope's daughter serve only as a bride, Or was she something more dangerous, a pawn prepared to seduce, entrap, and bend others to her father's will? The truth mattered little. Once such rumors took flight, they became shadows that followed her wherever she went, and though she bore them silently, they pressed upon her like invisible chains in the Orsini household. The marriage proved to be a delicate balancing act. Orsino himself, though noble, lacked the commanding presence of his wife's family. He was often overshadowed by the towering reputations of both his kin and his father-in-law. Lucretia, young though she was, began to notice the cracks within her marriage. Though they shared a name and a home, they rarely shared true companionship. She performed her duties, hosting when required, smiling at the right moments, offering polite deference in public, but within her heart grew an understanding that love would never define her path. Instead, survival and adaptability became her guiding lights. Rodrigo, for his part, considered the union a victory. The Orsini alliance bolstered his growing dominion, granting him legitimacy in circles where his Spanish roots and rapid ascent had once drawn suspicion. In his eyes, his daughter's role had been fulfilled. Whether she was content, respected, or even safe was secondary to the larger picture of power he was weaving. He had given her a stage, and now it was her task to perform upon it without faltering. For Lucretia, however, the marriage was the beginning of an education far beyond books or tutors. She began to learn how fragile alliances could be, how quickly admiration could turn to contempt, and how a woman, though often silent in the great councils of men, could still exert influence through poise, charm, and perception. She was beginning to see that her power did not lie in rebellion, but in subtlety, in mastering the role expected of her, while quietly molding it to her own advantage. She realized that she could be both compliant and cunning, both graceful and strategic, but beneath these lessons, a deeper transformation was taking root. Each smile that masked an insult, each banquet attended in silence, each whispered rumor endured without outward protest began to harden her spirit. She was no longer merely the innocent daughter paraded before powerful families. She was becoming a woman who understood the cost of survival in a world ruled by ambition. She saw her first marriage for what it truly was, not a sacred union, not a promise of shared dreams, but a transaction her youth and presence exchanged for power. Her life entangled in the endless web of politics, and yet, in this crucible of suspicion and gossip, Lucretia began to cultivate the very qualities that would later define her. She learned that appearances could be more important than truth, that reputation could be wielded like a blade, and that even in the midst of disdain, grace could unsettle one's enemies more than anger ever could. What was intended as her subjugation became, unknowingly, her training ground. She was learning how to survive, not as a cherished bride, but as a strategist cloaked in silk and innocence, though the marriage itself would ultimately falter, leaving behind more shadows than stability. Its impact on Lucretia was indelible. It stripped her of childish illusions, replaced dreams of love with the realities of political survival, and forced her to confront the cruel truth that her destiny would never be hers alone to choose. But it also gave her the first glimpse of her own resilience, a strength she had not known she possessed. For every whisper against her, she discovered silence could be her ally. For every suspicious glance, she found elegance could be her armor. And for every alliance forged through her body and name, she began to realize that she, too, could forge herself into something greater than the pawn her father had intended. From this first marriage, Lucretia stepped into a world where shame and honor were interchangeable, where loyalty was fragile, and where power was the only true currency. She entered as a bride, but she emerged as something else entirely, a young woman tempered by the cold fire of politics, learning, even in her earliest years, how to navigate a life that would forever be bound by ambition, intrigue, and survival. And though her union with Orsini may not have lasted, it marked the first chapter in a story where her endurance, her adaptability, and her uncanny ability to turn chains into tools would carry her further than anyone could have foreseen. Lucretia's life in Rome unfolded in a world where truth and fiction were almost indistinguishable, where the line between fact and fabrication was blurred by the whispers of courtiers and the jealous tongues of rivals. From the earliest days of her marriage, the papal court became less a home and more a stage upon which she was endlessly scrutinized, judged, and reinvented by others. She had been thrust into a society addicted to rumor, one where gossip traveled faster than news, and where reputations could be broken or made by a careless word murmured in a banquet hall. Rome did not need facts to shape its stories. It thrived on suggestion, innuendo, and the thrill of scandal. And in Lucretia, so young, so radiant, and so intricately tied to the name of Borgia, the city found its most enticing subject. The beauty that ought to have been her blessing was twisted into a curse. Her golden hair, her clear skin, her grace of movement, all qualities that might have elevated another woman into admiration, became the very weapons used against her. To those who envied the Borgias, she was painted. To those who feared them, she was imagined as a conspirator. And to those who despised them outright, she was cast as the living emblem of corruption. Every glance she offered was interpreted as seduction, every smile as manipulation, and every silence as evidence of dark secrets hidden from view. She could not walk into a room without sparking interpretations that stretched far beyond the truth of her intentions. Rome was a city of shadows and eyes. The papal court was filled with cardinals, envoys, ambassadors, and noble families, each of whom carried their own ambitions, each eager to read meaning into gestures too small to be defended against. A tilt of her head at a banquet might be taken as an overture to an alliance. A pause before answering a question might be whispered into a story of secrecy. Even her loyalty to her family, the natural bond of a daughter to her father and a sister to her brother, was twisted into something sinister. To her enemies, her closeness to Rodrigo and Cesar became proof not of affection, but of unholy complicity, feeding grotesque rumors of forbidden intimacy that no evidence could substantiate, yet which persisted with a life of their own. The venom of such whispers did not stop at idle gossip. They were sharpened into deliberate weapons by those who sought to weaken Rodrigo's papacy. Attacking the Pope directly was dangerous, but undermining his daughter was safer, subtler, and just as effective. If Lucretia could be branded as immoral, corrupt, or shameful, then Rodrigo's authority as the moral shepherd of Christendom could be questioned. By reducing her to an emblem of sin, his enemies cast shadows upon his legitimacy. In the grand game of Renaissance politics, Lucretia became less a person and more a pauna, living symbol, whose reputation was worth more in destruction than in truth. Within the halls of the Vatican, these stories spread like wildfire. Guests at papal feasts spoke in hushed tones. Rival noblewomen shared tales behind gilded fans. Foreign ambassadors carried exaggerated accounts back to their courts, each version more scandalous than the last. One tale might claim she entertained secret lovers in the gardens at night. Another suggested she possessed knowledge of poisons, slipping vials into her gowns to dispose of inconvenient enemies. Others, darker still, whispered of unnatural intimacy within her family, as though the closeness of the Borgias could only be explained through corruption. None of it was ever proven. Yet in Rome, proof was unnecessary. Repetition alone gave rumor the texture of truth, and soon the name Lucretia Borgia carried with it both fascination and suspicion wherever it was spoken. For Lucretia herself, this existence was suffocating. She could not move without eyes upon her, could not speak without tongues ready to twist her words. Even in the privacy of her chambers, she felt the weight of the city's gaze pressing upon her. For she knew that every servant, every visitor, every passing figure might carry away some detail to be reshaped into scandal. To live in Rome as a Borgia was to live in glass walls, and she was the most visible of them all. Yet, remarkably, she did not crumble under the strain. Instead, the fires of slander began to forge her into something stronger. She learned that vulnerability had no place in the papal court. The tears she might have shed in youth were replaced by silence. The protests she might have spoken were swallowed in favor of composure. Slowly, she crafted for herself an armor that no whisper could pierce, the armor of grace. She discovered that if people insisted on seeing her as a seductress, she could allow that illusion to linger without confirming it. If they whispered of her being dangerous, she let the rumor stand, for fear could serve her as well as respect. She began to understand that the very stories meant to destroy her could be turned into unspoken shields. A woman who was rumored to be poisonous was a woman less likely to be openly challenged at banquets. She perfected the art of smiling without revealing thought, of speaking without betraying more than courtesy. Her laughter, light and measured, became as much a tool as her silence. She could deflect suspicion by leaning into elegance, soothe hostility with carefully chosen words, or disarm rivals by offering kindness where cruelty was expected. Beneath the surface, she was learning the subtle art of survival in a city that had no patience for innocence. The constant shadow of rumor did not only shape how others saw her, it began to shape how she saw herself. She realized that she was no longer simply Rodrigo's daughter or Cesar's sister, no longer just a wife bound to an alliance. She was becoming something more, an icon of Rome's obsession with scandal, a name that carried stories in its wake, a figure who could command attention, whether through admiration or suspicion. Her reputation was no longer hers to control, but she discovered she could control how she moved within it. Instead of running from the lies, she walked among them, cloaked in their smoke, letting them conceal as much as they revealed. In this crucible, Lucretia's resilience crystallized. She grew sharper, more aware, more attuned to the rhythms of perception and the dangers of exposure. She saw how men around her wielded stories as weapons, and she began to learn how to wield them to to not through open declarations, but through the careful mastery of her image. Each whisper of scandal that failed to break her only proved her strength. Each attempt to tarnish her name only gave her more practice in turning disgrace into poise. Thus, in Rome, Lucretia was forged, not by truth. The endless web of rumor became the environment in which she grew, and though it sought to suffocate her, it instead forced her to breathe differently, to find air where none seemed available. She did not erase the shadows cast upon her. She learned to walk with them, to let them stretch long behind her while she stepped steadily forward. By the time she began to rise into her own authority, she was no longer the fragile girl who had entered the Orsini household. She had become a woman shaped by whispers, tested by deceit, and tempered by scandal. She had lived beneath the weight of Rome's gossip and emerged with the realization that while truth was fragile, perception could be unbreakable if handled correctly. And in a world where perception mattered more than reality, this was not a curse, but a kind of hidden power. The shadow of rumor would never leave her. It clung to her name until her final days. But rather than bow beneath its weight, she had transformed it into a constant companion, a dark twin that reminded her of the fragility of her place in the world and the necessity of her strength. Lucretia Borgia did not escape scandal. She endured it, carried it, and reshaped it. And in doing so, she became far more than the victim her enemies intended. She became a woman who learned, within the very furnace of slander, how to turn even the sharpest of lies into the foundation of her survival. Life for Lucretia within the walls of the Borgia household was never simply a matter of comfort or privilege, as outsiders so often assumed. Behind the gilded doors, her existence was one of constant negotiation, a delicate balancing act between her own private heart and the heavy demands of loyalty and survival. From her earliest years, it was made clear to her that her life was not her own. Each moment, each choice, each alliance was woven into the fabric of her father Rodrigo's ambition and her brother Cesar's ruthless designs. She was not only their daughter and sister, she was their emissary, their tool, their instrument in the endless game of politics that defined Renaissance Rome to the world. She was luminous, the golden daughter of the Pope, a jewel to be placed in the crown of whichever family best suited the Borgia's rise. But to herself, she was a young woman trying to carve out fragments of space where her humanity could breathe. Dictated by strategy rather than affection, carried the weight of unspoken tragedy. Each time she was told she must wed, it was not the language of love she heard, but the language of treaties and alliances. She was expected to embrace men she barely knew, to build trust with husbands who often viewed her not as a partner, but as a political bridge. The love she longed for was rarely offered, and when tenderness did appear, it was usually shadowed by suspicion. Letters from her hand tell us of her quiet hopes, her yearning for connection beyond duty, for moments of affection that belonged to her alone. Yet time and again, betrayal crept into these fragile hopes. Husbands doubted her, lovers turned into pawns, and even the most innocent gestures of warmth became fodder for a court eager to turn whispers into scandal. Every embrace, every glance, every letter could be twisted into evidence of infidelity or conspiracy. At the heart of her turmoil lay her loyalty to the Borgias. Her family was her blood, her shield, and her prison all at once. She adored Rodrigo's fatherly warmth, the the way he could make her feel cherished, even while plotting her future, like a general moving pieces on a battlefield. She trusted Cesar's fierce protection, though she also knew his devotion came bound with ambition that rarely spared her. Their love for her was undeniable, yet it was also entangled in their hunger for power. When accusations of corruption, murder, or scandal swirled through Rome, it was never only Rodrigo or Cesare who were named, it was Lucretia too, drawn into the storm by the gravity of their sins. Her loyalty meant that she endured, that she kept silent even when silence tore at her, that she embodied the innocence they needed her to project. Even when her spirit cracked under the weight of decisions made without her consent, yet survival was never passive for Lucretia. It was not resignation, but adaptation. She discovered early that she could not fight rumor with denial, for denial often fanned the flames of gossip. Instead, she learned to wield silence like a weapon, to let others wonder and speculate while she maintained her composure. When her reputation was stained with scandal, she did not lash out in rage. She leaned into grace and humility, appearing so calm and unbothered that critics were disarmed. Her strength lay not in confrontation, but in transformation. She turned slander into mystery, disgrace into allure, vulnerability into quiet resilience. She began to understand that in Rome, where perception mattered more than truth, it was often wiser to let the masks others placed upon her remains, so long as she could use them to shield herself. There were times when her desires clashed with her family's demands, and in those moments she faced choices no young woman should have borne. She might have pursued love, but love threatened to unravel alliances. She might have spoken her own will, but that risked angering the men who wielded her life as though it were their own. And so she chose loyalty, again and again, not because she was blind or submissive, but because she understood the brutal reality of her world. Alone, she would have been consumed by the wolves of Rome. With her family, even in chains, she had protection. Unity was her only shield against a city eager to see her and the Borgias destroyed. But within those sacrifices, she did not allow herself to become hollow. She cultivated small, private spaces of hope, fleeting moments where she could feel like a woman rather than a pawn. A letter written in tenderness, a glance exchanged in secret, a prayer whispered in solitude. These became her lifelines, proof that her humanity had not been entirely crushed. And yet, with each passing year, she also grew wiser, harder, more attuned to the subtleties of survival. She saw how others used stories as weapons, and she learned to wield her own image with the same cunning. She might be painted as a seductress, but she could let the story linger. Knowing that a woman feared was often safer than a woman pitied. Those who looked only at her beauty saw a fragile girl, but those who looked closer began to glimpse something more formidable. Beneath the silks and jewels, beneath the whispers of scandal, there was a survivor. She was learning to navigate two worlds at once, the intimate realm of human longing, where she yearned for connection and love, and the ruthless realm of politics, where every gesture carried consequence. Few women of her time had been forced to master such a double life, but Lucretia carried it with a grace that masked the depth of her struggle. Her story in these years was not one of simple triumph or despair. It was a slow, painful endurance, the forging of strength in a crucible of betrayal, rumor, and duty. She learned to bend without breaking, to love without losing herself entirely, to endure betrayal without surrendering her dignity. These years of quiet suffering, of masked resilience, of hidden compromises, laid the foundation for the woman she would one day become, in that furnace of love denied and loyalty demanded. She was tempered into something stronger. She was not merely her father's daughter or her brother's sister. She was not only the victim of gossip or the pawn in alliances. She was a woman who learned the secret of survival in Renaissance Rome, that power often comes not from force, but from the ability to endure, adapt, and turn even the harshest of chains into tools. And it was this resilience, born in those years of balancing love, loyalty, and survival, that would later allow her not just to endure history's judgment, but to carve out her own enduring place within it. The name Borgia carried with it a weight that could not be ignored. And for Lucretia, it was both a crown and a curse. From the gilded halls of the Vatican to the echoing courtyards of noble palaces, her identity was never her sonnet, was a canvas upon which others painted their darkest suspicions, their fiercest envies, their most elaborate tales of lust and betrayal. Every whisper that escaped the lips of Rome's courtiers seemed to weave itself into the fabric of her reputation, until truth and invention became indistinguishable. She could not breathe, she could not love, she could not even smile without Rome assigning meaning to the smallest gesture. To walk into a banquet hall was to step onto a stage, and the audience was always eager to believe the worst. They called her more than a daughter, more than a sister, more than a wife. They called her a siren cloaked in innocence, a woman whose smile promised sweetness, but whose hands were thought to be stained with hidden power. Some said she was a puppet, others swore she was the puppeteer. In their stories, her innocence was never genuine. It was a mask, carefully worn, designed to conceal forbidden secrets and ruthless ambition. Even when she wept, there were those who claimed her tears were nothing more than a performance, calculated to disarm and deceive. It was easier for them to believe in a Lucretia of shadows than to accept the possibility of a young woman trapped in the iron grip of her family's designs. Her marriages, arranged and rearranged like chess pieces by her father Rodrigo and her brother Cesare, became fuel for Rome's unquenchable thirst for scandal. When her union with Giovanni Sforza crumbled, the streets whispered of impotence, betrayal, and poison, as though the dissolution of a marriage could only be explained through sin. When Alfonso of Aragon lay dead, cut down in the prime of youth, Rome claimed the Borgias had orchestrated his murder. And in the corners of candlelit rooms, her name was murmured as an accomplice. When she smiled at a courtier, a rumor of infidelity spread like wildfire. When she looked away, they said it was because she harbored a secret passion for someone else. Every movement of her eyes, every gesture of her hands, became a cipher interpreted by the tongues of a city that lived and thrived on intrigue. Her father and brother, though they loved her in their own ruthless ways, rarely defended her name in the court of public opinion. To them, her silence was not weakness but strategy. They believed that denial lent credibility to gossip, that words in defense only added oxygen to the flames of rumor. And so they instructed her to say nothing, to smile with grace, to let the storm rage around her while she stood unmoved at its center. Yet that silence was not without cost. Each day, The venom of slander seeped deeper into her soul, forcing her to carry a burden she did not create but could never escape. Within this crucible of lies and suspicion, Lucretia discovered a paradoxical form of power. Infamy, though corrosive, had its uses. A name stained by scandal was also a name that could not be forgotten. While others faded into the obscurity of history, Lucretia's infamy etched her into memory, ensuring her story would be told, retold, and twisted for centuries to come. To be spoken of in whispers, to be feared for sins she may never have committed, was in some ways safer than being dismissed as powerless. In the merciless world of Rome, a woman underestimated could be destroyed, but a woman cloaked in mystery could wield that very aura as a shield. So she began to let the rumors live. She learned the subtle art of leaving questions unanswered, of turning silence into suggestion. When accused of secret lovers, she offered no protest, knowing that denials only stoked curiosity. When painted as a poisoner, she bore the accusation with quiet dignity, allowing her enemies to believe her capable of such acts if it meant they might think twice before crossing her. It was not that she reveled in their lies, it was that she recognized the strange alchemy of scandal, how it could transform weakness into strength if one had the patience to endure its sting. Behind her composed exterior, however, there was pain. To be misjudged at every turn, to have one's character reduced to gossip and shadow, was to live in a prison without walls. Every friendship was suspect, every gesture of kindness twisted into manipulation. Those who might have loved her approached with caution, unsure whether they courted an angel or a siren. Those who envied her found fuel in her beauty and position, unwilling to believe that the woman they despised might also be a victim of forces beyond her control. For Lucretia, the loneliness of infamy was perhaps its sharpest blade. It cut her off from simple joys, from unguarded affection, from trust, and yet she endured. That endurance was not passive but active, forged through a conscious choice to transform suffering into resilience. She learned to walk through crowded halls with her head high, even as whispers chased her footsteps. She mastered the art of composure, of letting her face betray nothing while her heart throbbed with the weight of unspoken sorrow. She came to understand that survival required more than innocence. She required the ability to inhabit the role others assigned her, to let them believe in their myths while she quietly shaped her own reality beneath the surface. In this way, the scandal that sought to destroy her became a kind of armor. It hardened her against the cruelty of Rome's court, prepared her for a life in which betrayal was commonplace and loyalty a rare jewel. The very lies that smeared her name also taught her the language of power, the necessity of silence, the cunning of patience. She discovered that reputation, no matter how darkly painted, was not only a burden but a weapon, a tool she could wield in ways her enemies could not anticipate. Lucretia was no longer merely a daughter, a pawn in the schemes of her family, or a bride exchanged for alliances. She became a figure of fascination, a symbol of Rome's obsession with beauty entwined with corruption. To some, she was a saint wronged by rumor, to others, a sinner cloaked in charm, but to all, she was unforgettable. Her life ceased to belong to herself, became a legend, written as much by the imaginations of others as by the truth of her own actions. In this tension between fact and fabrication, she carved out her identity. she was not innocent, for innocence had been stripped from her by the relentless scrutiny of Rome. She was not guilty, for the crimes ascribed to her were more often fantasies than realities. She was something in between, an enigma, who survived not by escaping scandal, but by enduring it, adapting to it, even bending it to her advantage when possible. Her silence, her composure, her very refusal to collapse under the weight of infamy became the foundation of a strength that few could recognize, but all could sense. Thus, the whispers that filled Rome's corridors, the scandals etched into the city's memory, did not erase her. They made her eternal. She emerged not as the woman Rome insisted she was, nor as the victim she might have become, but as something more complex, more resilient, more enduring. Lucretia Borgia was no longer merely a young woman lost in the shadow of her father and brother. She had become a paradox, a myth, a survivor whose legacy was as much forged by lies as by truth, yet all the stronger for having borne the weight of both. To carry the name Borgia in Renaissance Italy was to live in a paradox, one that was as gilded as it was poisoned. For Lucretia, the name was not merely an identity, was an inheritance woven into every glance cast her way, every whisper uttered in the corridors of power, every suspicion that lingered even in moments of quiet intimacy. It was the first thing people saw when they looked at her, more powerful than her smile, stronger than her beauty, heavier than her silence. The name itself preceded her, casting both light and shadow in every room she entered, and she, whether she wished it or not, was forever bound to its weight. It offered privilege beyond imagination. Doors swung open before her that remained locked to others. She was received with reverence at courts where less fortunate women would not have been admitted. Noble families competed for her hand, knowing that to marry her was to tie themselves, however uneasily, to the throne of St. Peter itself. Lavish banquets, fine silks, priceless jewels, all were hers, not because of her deeds, but because of her blood. Yet each gift, each honor, carried within it the thorns of suspicion. When she smiled, they said it was the smile of calculation. When she spoke, they wondered whose words she carried. When she extended her hand in kindness, they questioned what poison might be hidden beneath her rings. Her father, Rodrigo, Pope Alexander VI, embodied both the glory and the disgrace of the name. His rise to power had been as brilliant as it was notorious, his appetite for wealth, influence, and control boundless. To his enemies, he was corruption made flesh. To his allies, he was the shrewd architect of opportunity. Cesar, her brother, carried the other half of the family's reputation, ruthless, charismatic, brilliant in war, yet feared for his cruelty. Where Rodrigo manipulated with politics, Cesare conquered with the sword. And Lucretia, though she neither plotted wars nor schemed for PayPal gold, bore the consequences of both. When Rodrigo's name was spat with venom, when Cesar's enemies trembled and cursed, their shadows fell across her, and she was accused, judged, and condemned for sins she had never committed. The accusations themselves grew into legends, whispers of incest between her and her brother, of complicity in her husband's murder, of secrets exchanged in candlelit rooms, painted her as a woman at once dangerous and irresistible. To the powerful, it was easier to believe that Lucretia shared the same corruption as the men of her family than to imagine her as an innocent. To Rome's gossips, her beauty was too luminous, not to be entwined with sin. And so, her very identity became a battlefield where the world fought its war against the Borgias. Every falsehood believed about her, every cruel rumor circulated in the piazzas and salons was less about truth than it was about politics. She was a symbol, and symbols were always easier to defame than people. The weight of this legacy could have crushed her. Another woman might have broken under the pressure of being at once honored and reviled, celebrated for her lineage and despised for the same. But Lucretia endured. She came to understand the cruel rhythm of her life to the world. She was the glittering jewel of papal Rome, radiant, refined, untouchable. Yet, in the privacy of her own chambers, she carried the anguish of a young woman whose reputation was endlessly torn apart by others, who was forced to answer for sins not her own, who longed for simplicity but was chained to magnificence. At times, she imagined what it might be like to cast off the name altogether, to walk away from the echoing halls of power and live as an unknown woman in some distant town where her smile would be seen as nothing more than a smile. But such dreams were futile. The world would never allow her anonymity, and her family would never permit her independence. Her name was her inheritance, her prison, and though she came to understand it slowly, her weapon, for in carrying the burden, she discovered a strange resilience. If Rome insisted on painting her as complicit in the sins of her bloodline, she would learn to wield that perception. If her silence was to be seen as mystery, she would cultivate it. If her presence in a room inspired both desire and fear, she would let both work in her favor. She could not control the slanders whispered about her, but she could control how she moved through them, graceful, untouchable, never collapsing beneath their weight. Her endurance became her quiet rebellion. She mastered the art of appearing serene while storms raged around her. She let her poise disarm those who expected hysteria, her gentleness unsettle those who anticipated malice. She allowed the rumors to exist, to swirl endlessly, without giving them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. In time, this silence became a form of power in itself, a veil she wore as carefully as any jewel-studded gown. Thus, the Borgia name, intended by fate to define and confine her, became the crucible in which her strength was forged. It robbed her of innocence, but gave her resilience. It denied her peace, but endowed her with presence. It placed her at the heart of every whisper, every scandal, every gaze, but it also ensured she would never be forgotten. She learned to live with the contradictions, to be admired and despised, exalted and slandered, victim and symbol. And in embracing those contradictions, she found a strange kind of freedom. She could not choose her name, but she could choose how to carry it. And so she bore it with a grace that confounded her enemies and captivated her observers. She understood that history would not remember her as she truly was, but as the image Rome had constructed of her. Yet even within that distortion, she carved out her survival, her dignity, and, in time, her power. The burden was immense, but it was also the foundation upon which her legacy was built. Without the weight of the Borgia name, she might have been forgotten as another noble daughter married off into obscurity. With it, she became unforgettable, a woman whose story echoed beyond her lifetime, whose presence lingered not in spite of her family's sins, but because of them. She bore the curse, but in doing so, she transformed it into a crown, within the gilded halls of Rome. Beneath the painted ceilings, where angels seemed to hover above marble pillars, whispers carried more weight than decrees signed with a seal, more weight even than swords unsheathed in anger. These whispers lived in the spaces between conversations, in the careful pauses of cardinals and ambassadors, in the silken laughter of noblewomen and the solemn tones of clerics who hid daggers beneath their robes of faith. And at the center of these murmurs stood Lucretia, a figure who seemed both too fragile to endure them and too enigmatic to ever be destroyed by them. To the courtiers who moved like shadows through those labyrinthine corridors, Lucretia was not merely a daughter, a wife, or a sister. She was a cipher, a mystery they longed to unravel, but could never fully comprehend. To some, she was the beautiful facade of Borgia power, the velvet glove concealing a hand of iron. To others, she was an innocent puppet, controlled by Rodrigo's cunning and Cesar's ruthless designs. Yet in both cases, she was dangerous not because of what she did, but because of what she represented. Every step she took down those echoing passageways was observed, weighed, and interpreted. A gown of pale silk, embroidered with gold thread, was not merely attire. It was a declaration of wealth, of influence, perhaps of arrogance. A laugh shared at a banquet was not seen as joy, but as mockery and insult wrapped in charm. A moment of silence in the chapel was not devotion but secrecy, evidence of plots whispered into her ear by the unseen. In a world where truth had no voice, perception ruled supreme, and perception was a weapon honed, sharper than any blade. Behind closed doors, the stories grew bolder. Ambassadors, their pens scratching across parchment by candlelight, wrote letters to their kings and queens, describing her with contradictions so stark they bordered on absurdity. One described her as a naive child manipulated by her father and brother, a pawn traded between noble houses like a piece of jewelry. Another claimed she was the very architect of the Borgia schemes, a woman whose soft smiles masked a mind as dangerous as Caesar's sword. Both portraits could not coexist, yet both were believed, because both served the agendas of the men who spread them. These letters traveled beyond Rome, carried by swift riders across mountains and seas, until they reached the courts of Spain, France, England, and beyond. And in those distant courts, where few had ever laid eyes upon her, Lucretia became legend. To kings and queens, she was both fascination and warning. They marveled at tales of her beauty, her golden hair, her serene composure. They shuddered at stories of her supposed scenes, of poisoned cups and forbidden loves whispered in midnight chambers. To some, she was irresistible, the kind of woman whose name lingered like perfume in the mind. To others, she was proof of how deeply the papacy had rotted, how corruption and scandal now draped themselves in velvet and pearls. Even the corridors themselves seemed to conspire in spreading her story. The very walls carried sound, amplifying laughter, distorting whispers, delivering fragments of conversations from one chamber to another. At banquets, her name passed between goblets of wine, coated with feigned admiration, but edged with jealousy and disdain. At council meetings, her marriages were dissected with the cold precision of generals planning campaigns. Each alliance treated not as a bond of love, but as a treaty of war. Even in chapels, where silence should have been sacred, Her name slipped between the Avenue Marias, spoken like a forbidden invocation. Lucretia lived in this world of echoes, where every word was dangerous, every glance could be twisted into scandal, and every silence filled with insinuation. And yet, amidst this cacophony of suspicion, she discovered something few around her ever understood. Whispers were not only threats, they were maps. Each rumor revealed not only what others thought of her, but what they feared, what they desired, what they envied. A story of her supposed seduction of a nobleman was not truly about hurt, was about that nobleman's ambition or his rival's jealousy. A tale of her complicity in a poisoning was not about truth, but about the desperation of those who longed to see the Borgias fall. She began to listen with purpose. Where others might have crumbled under the weight of slander, she treated it as a teacher. She learned to discern which families sought to undermine her father, which cardinals feared Caesar's rise, which ambassadors exaggerated tales for the benefit of their distant kings. Gossip became her textbook, rumor her tutor, and slowly she understood that to navigate Rome's corridors was not to fight against the whispers, but to let them guide her through the maze of ambition and betrayal. Each slander sharpened her wit, each cruel speculation steeled her resolve, and each time she endured the venomous hiss of gossip without flinching, she became stronger, wiser, and far more dangerous than those who thought her merely a pawn. She discovered that mystery could be armor. If people could not decide whether she was naive or cunning, innocent or guilty, angel or temptress, then she could exist as all of them at once, wielding ambiguity like a cloak that concealed her true self. Rome thought it was diminishing her by drowning her in lies. Instead, it was shaping her into someone capable of surviving in its most merciless court. The whispers that were meant to break her became the rhythm of her education in power. And though she had not yet seized that power fully, she carried within her the seeds of something formidable. For in a world where truth was silenced and speculation ruled, survival depended not on silencing the whispers, but on learning to use them. And Lucretia, daughter of Rodrigo, sister of Cesare, student of Rome's merciless stage, began to master that art. She no longer feared the corridors. She listened, she learned, and she endured. And in time, the same voices that sought to destroy her would unwittingly craft her legend. Centuries have a way of softening edges and sharpening myths, of burying the truth beneath layers of interpretation while allowing fragments of reality to glimmer through. For Lucretia Borgia, the daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, who ascended to the papal throne as Alexander VI, and the sister of Cesare Borgia, remembered as both visionary and tyrant, her life was never entirely her own. She was born into a world that expected her to be a symbol, a vessel for her family's ambitions, and a shield against their enemies' attacks. Yet, as the storms of scandal, rumor, and rivalry swirled around her, she grew into something far more enduring than her family might have ever anticipated. Her legacy became not simply a tale of infamy, but a lesson in the malleable nature of power and the relentless endurance of perception. In her early years, Lucretia was seen by many as a pawn, an ornament in the grand strategies of her father and brother. Marriages were arranged not with her heart in mind, but with the calculus of advantage and survival. In the turbulent politics of Renaissance Italy, to those watching from Rome's corridors of intrigue, She seemed trapped in the role of dutiful daughter, sent to charm, unite, or disarm, depending on what the moment required. Yet, beneath that image of passivity, she was learning. Each alliance, each betrayal, each rumor that slashed through her reputation became a lesson in endurance and adaptability. She absorbed the language of survival, not through books or tutors, but through the venomous whispers of ambassadors, the cold negotiations of councils, and the unsparing eyes of rivals who never wished her well. When she became Duchess of Ferrara, many expected her to carry the baggage of her family's notorious name into a court already wary of outside influence. Yet it was here, in Ferrara, that she began to recast her image, not as a scandalized daughter of the papacy, but as a sovereign woman whose intellect and poise commanded respect. Her husband, Alfonso d'Este, ruled by bloodline, but Lucretia ruled by presence. She transformed the court into a vibrant center of culture, extending her patronage to poets, painters, musicians, and scholars. What others had derided as a Borgia Cursta, association with cunning and manipulation, she reshaped into a gift. The ability to understand people's desires and fears, to anticipate needs, and to weave herself into the fabric of governance without ever appearing domineering under her influence. Ferrara blossomed into a hub of Renaissance brilliance. Artists like Ariosto and Tasso thrived under her patronage, and her court became known not for scandal but for refinement. She welcomed visitors from across Europe, and those who once whispered of poison and incest now wrote of elegance, wisdom, and generosity. What is most striking is not merely that she succeeded in redefining her public role, but that she did so without ever denying the shadows of her past. She did not attempt to erase her origins. She carried them, reshaped them, and in some ways even exploited them. For she knew that the fascination surrounding her, whether born of admiration or suspicion, gave her a power few women of her age possessed. Still, the weight of perception could never be entirely shed. For every act of grace she offered, there were chroniclers ready to remind the world of her family's alleged sins. Centuries later, plays, novels, and operas would revive the rumors, the poisoned chalices, the incestuous liaisons, the whispered conspiracies. These tales endured not because they were true, but because they were captivating. And so, Lucretia became less a person in the memory of history than a mirror reflecting society's fear and fascination with female power. She was transformed into an archetype, the femme fatale, draped in silks and shadows, the dangerous beauty who enthralls and destroys in equal measure. Yet, if one peers beyond the veil of legend, a more complex truth emerges. This was a woman who endured humiliation, who bore the crushing burden of decisions made by others in her name, who was judged not by her deeds but by her bloodline. And instead of collapsing under that weight, she found ways to turn it into strength. She learned that to survive in a world dominated by men and sharpened by politics, one must be more than merely innocent. One must be adaptable. Innocence alone was fragile. Resilience was armor. It is telling that her legacy cannot be confined to one narrative. To some, she remains the villainess painted by her enemies. To others, she is the misunderstood victim of propaganda. And to still others, she is a Renaissance matron whose diplomacy and cultural patronage rivaled those of queens. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one version over another, but in acknowledging that she embodied them all, for identity is rarely singular, especially for a woman thrust into the center of Renaissance politics. Her story also forces us to confront a deeper reality, that perception is itself a form of power. Lucretia did not have the authority of a crown or the brute force of an army, but she wielded perception with skill. She turned whispers into masks, using people's assumptions to her advantage. If they thought her harmless, she could listen and observe without suspicion. If they thought her dangerous, she could use that fear as protection. She mastered the battlefield of rumor in a way her father and brother never did, not by silencing her critics, but by outlasting them. Her life then becomes a parable of transformation. Scandal, when endured with patience, can become fascination. Disgrace, when reshaped by resilience, can become influence. And a name, no matter how tainted, can be turned from a curse into a legacy. Lucretia Borgia's life is proof that history is not written by the innocent or the guilty, but by those who survive long enough to tell their own story through their presence, their actions, and their endurance, even in death. Her legacy remained contested. Some chroniclers praised her as a pious duchess, generous to the poor, a mother devoted to her children. Others revived the old accusations, unwilling to let her escape the shadows of her lineage. But perhaps this duality is precisely what ensures her immortality. For if she had lived an unremarkable life, untouched by rumor, her name might have faded into obscurity alongside countless other noble women of her era. Instead, she became unforgettable, not in spite of the legends, but because of them today. Her story still resonates because it speaks to something timeless, the tension between who we are and how the world sees us. Lucretia reminds us that reputation can be both a prison and a weapon, that identity is never entirely ours to control, and that strength often comes not from innocence, but from the ability to endure suspicion, envy, and hostility without losing one's sense of self. The girl, once reduced to a pawn in her family's power games, became, through resilience and reinvention, a sovereign figure whose influence extended beyond her lifetime. And though her name continues to evoke poison and betrayal in the popular imagination, those who look deeper see something more enduring. A woman who understood the treachery of perception and turned it into a tool of survival. A duchess who left behind not only scandal, but also art, culture, and diplomacy, and a legacy that refuses to be silenced. Thus, the final irony of her life emerges. The very myths meant to diminish her ensured that she would never be forgotten. Where countless princes and generals have been lost to history's indifference, Lucretia Borgia remains alive in its imagination, not because of what was whispered about her, but because of how she endured it. In the end, she did not erase her past. She reclaimed it. She stands as proof that even in an age ruled by men and scarred by power, a woman could shape her destiny, not by escaping perception, but by mastering it. And so, long after the palaces crumbled and the banners of her family were torn down, the name of Lucretia Borgia continues to echo, not merely as rumor or scandal, but as testament to the strength of transformation, the endurance of perception, and the legacy of a power that refuses to be erased.